Video games are an immersive experience, and that means you're going to experience stuff like fear, shock, adrenaline rushes, things that stop your heart dead in its tracks. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on GameRanks, 10 of the most heart-stopping video game moments of all time. Starting off at number 10, it's Alien Isolation's Medical Bay. It's hard to narrow down the most terrifying parts of Alien Isolation. The game's basically a panic attack made manifest. But the one part of the game that really stands out is the Medical Bay. You don't actually reach this area until Mission 5, which is more than an hour into the game, and the alien gets introduced well before this moment, but this is the area where you're really forced to deal with the Xenomorph. It's not just those scripted moments and little sounds in those sort of linear sections. Now the game just throws you into a large area, gives you an objective, and the alien shows up basically whenever it feels like it. This is where the horrifying power of the alien becomes obvious. This thing can pop up anywhere. It spots you almost instantly, and it's a relentless hunter. Also, unlike later parts of the game, you have no real defenses against it. Most of the time in horror games, getting killed takes a lot of tension out of a scary segment, but not here. You're going to die a lot in this area, and it's never not scary, and it's partly because of the whole way this guy's AI works. You can't really know when it's going to happen, so if anything, getting killed actually just makes it worse. At number 9 is the baby thing from Resident Evil Village. Outside the opening survival segment, Village isn't that scary of a game. It's going for more of a Resident Evil 4 vibe, more spooky than straight up frightening for most of the experience. That's what makes that stupid baby so damn scary. When you go into the dollhouse, the game suddenly stops being a Resident Evil game for a little while and becomes like Silent Hill or something. It's jarring. The buildup is what makes the appearance of this thing so effective, too. You're slowly going through this dark basement, dark hallway, and suddenly... giant monster baby. Oh, would you look at that? Not every day you see one of those. I'm just kidding. That's not the reaction I had. It's not at all the sort of thing you expect to see in these games, and the only way to survive is just to run away from it. It's a short segment all told, but everything up until the end where you reach safety in the elevator, it's really unpleasant. On the first run through, this whole part is just super terrifying and a surprise. Resident Evil games always have plenty of freaky moments in the past, but nothing quite like this. Moving on to number 8, it's the Leviathans in Subnautica. What makes this game such a unique horror experience is that technically it's not a horror game, it's a survival game. It doesn't really try to be scary, per se. It doesn't need to. The terror is built into the entire premise of the game. You're stranded on an ocean planet, so you're going to be spending a ton of time underwater, which the danger of drowning, always in the back of your mind, and you're not even really underwater. It's a game. It's tense, though. And when the game starts throwing Leviathans at you, the gigantic sea creatures, the apex predators, there's basically nothing you can do to fight them, and your only options are running and hiding. If they spot you, there's not a lot you can do, though. It's bad enough when you see one out in the open, but the real terror comes when they appear out of nowhere in the darkness. Oof. The game forces you into some very deep, very dark places, which kind of just suck on their own. But when a gigantic ghost Leviathan appears out of nowhere to eat your face, and, you know, the rest of you, I guess, that's when you'll panic, close the game, and take a little walk around the room. If you're the type to fear open water, do not play this game. And number 7 is BioShock: The Dentist. And speaking of water, the original BioShock isn't really thought of much as a horror game these days, but its atmosphere and world building are still second to none. The early parts of the game lean into the horror of the situation a little bit more, especially the medical pavilion. This place is a lock for creepy game locations. It's got medical equipment, it's full of crazy people that are at least a little mutated. It's basically a horror staple and a perfect introduction into the deranged world of the underwater city of Rapture. It's an all-around spooky place, but the most memorable moment is when you get to the dental wing of the complex. While exploring, you can find a gene tonic lying around, and when you pick it up, a crazed doctor splicer jumps you from behind.
I'm opening you!
It's not the most elaborate jump scare ever, but it's incredibly effective. One of the most memorable from that era, and it's hardly the only scare in the place. It just sticks with me, for that matter, the most.
What is that there?
Moving on to number 6 is A Little Pig from Outlast, a game that wastes no time making it clear just how screwed you are. The game gives you a few minutes to build up some tension while you explore the seemingly abandoned mental institution, but things go awry pretty quickly. They time it out perfectly. They give you just enough time for it to get really tense before they freak you out with a hanging body. Suddenly bursting to life and a SWAT-looking guy impaled into a pole who's shockingly still alive. After experiencing some stuff, you might think the game is going to give you a break and take a few minutes before something else happens, but no! You get jumped out of nowhere while you're crawling through a narrow gap by this big bastard who calls you Little Pig and throws you through a window. It is one hell of an introduction for the rest of the game, and the scares only get more relentless from here. The attack is just so unexpected and so sudden. It happens when you least expect it, and you're definitely mentally unprepared for it. So when the game suddenly surprises you with this big nasty freak, it's really effective. Just one hell of a horrifying start. Sets the tone for what Outlast is perfectly.
I'm sorry, my son. I didn't want to have to do this to you. But you can't leave. Not yet. There is so much yet for you to witness.
At number 5 is that ladder in Fear. If you've played the original Fear, you know what I'm talking about. That ladder. I don't need to describe it. It's burned into your brain at this point. It's the ladder from Fear. The original Fear has that ladder, and that's what I'm talking about. Now, what makes the original Fear so special is that, at least in theory, it shouldn't really be scary. You play as an uber badass military killing machine with slow motion powers. You got bullet time on your side. You should feel unstoppable, but against the supernatural forces of Alma, you're not. There's not actually even a lot you can do. The combination of The Ring and Hardboiled seems like it would be incompatible. Like, those aren't things that jive, but Monolith, man, they made it work. Now, they did it by peppering the game with some expertly timed jump scares. Now, jump scares can be very annoying and very cheap. Fears are not. What makes this ladder so memorable isn't necessarily the scare itself, but when it happens.
Deserve to die. They all deserve to die.
In games, when you start climbing a ladder, you are safe. It's a canned animation, there's nothing to worry about, but Fear throws out the rulebook with this legendary scare. It's such a good subversion of expectations, I can't help but laud it anytime I'm talking about jump scares. The vast majority of jump scares, like I said, cheap. But when you enter this completely ordinary room with an ordinary ladder, you go down it and suddenly you see Alma, the murderous little ghost girl, standing at the top of the ladder just staring. That's freaky enough, but as you get down, you suddenly get a face full of cannibal bad guy, Paxton Patel. It's all just a scripted moment. You can't actually get hurt, but this segment freaked me out all the same. Just expert stuff here. Moving on to number 4, it is Stalker's Bloodsucker. In Stalker, there's 2 enemies you will truly learn to fear. There's the Controller, which is a bizarre monster with an attack that makes you jump out of your pants the first time it hits you with it, and the Bloodsuckers, which aren't quite so gimmicky, but they make you up for it by being absolutely frickin' terrifying. These vicious beasts are the death claws of the Stalker universe. They're tough, they're vicious, but worst of all, they can turn invisible. They are an all-around nightmare to deal with. You never quite know if one is stalking around, but the game is, of course, called Stalker, so it's likely that it's going to happen soon, at very least.
Watch where you're shooting.
When you do see one, it's usually a second before you drop dead. The only way to fight these things is to be cautious as hell, and even then, it can feel like a coin flip whether you're going to die or not. It's not like they're completely impossible. These things do have their weaknesses, but man, those first few times you encounter them are some of the most frightening moments in the Stalker games, and take it from me, that's saying something. Moving on to number 3, it's Pigsy from Manhunt. By the end of Manhunt, you've gone from being prey to predator. Once you start to master the somewhat slow controls, eventually you're a total killing machine. You stalk it through the shadows, cutting down everything that stands before you. By the time you get to the final stretch of this game, you're feeling pretty unstoppable, at least until Pigsy comes around. The entire game teases this guy, but he still feels like he comes out of nowhere, stabbing through elevator doors with that freaking chainsaw. All your weapons are lost, and now you're being hunted by a gibbering naked lunatic wearing a bloody pig head. And I don't mean like those bloody rapscallions, I mean like dripping blood. It's terrifying. One wrong move and you're dead. It's a total reversal of how things have been going up until this point, and it's the ultimate challenge of the game. At number 2, it's Dead Space 2, The Return to the Ishimura. Pound for pound, the scariest moment in the entire Dead Space series is when you gotta go back to the Ishimura in Dead Space 2. It's kind of a nostalgia trip as well as a masterclass in building tension as the game follows you entering the ship, and it seems like you're gonna get attacked, but it doesn't happen. It's honestly insane how well this works. Dead Space 2 is a little more action-oriented than the first, and I think that lends to this moment even more, because you're kind of expecting to deal with enemies most of the time, and again, you just don't. There's the hallway, the airlock, another room. You just keep going. Your trigger finger getting itchier by the moment. Something's got to be ready to jump out of the vent at your face, but it doesn't happen. The game drags this out for a few agonizing moments, long enough to where you kind of feel like this is going to be a segment of the game where it's less action-oriented, and then bam! Drops a ton of bricks on you. Largest swarm of enemies yet. Once the necromorphs start attacking, it is relentless. It feels endless. It's overwhelming. It's nerve-wracking. It's just an all-around perfectly paced sequence to maximize tension. There's no gimmicks, no cinematics, no crazy visual tricks, just a lot of tension followed by overwhelming terror. And number 1 is Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, The Re-Deads. Nobody expects a Legend of Zelda game to be heart-stopping, but the madmen at Nintendo did it. They made a game that traumatized an entire generation, and all it took was one enemy with a name that makes it sound like you're trying to avoid saying another certain R word, The Re-Dead. These things scared the absolute crap out of me. It was 1998. I was playing Zelda. You know, I was basically expecting Mario level stuff. And yeah, that piano in Mario 64 was unnecessary, Nintendo, but it's nothing compared to this. These things are rare, but when they pop up, man, it sucks. When they look at you, they make this bone-curdling scream that paralyzes you in place. You can frantically mash buttons to escape, but if you're not fast enough, the creature wraps its arms and legs around you and squeezes Link to death. Its weird face and jerky, unexpected movements make this thing more terrifying than it already is. And if anything, the low-poly Nintendo 64 aesthetic adds an extra layer to the creepy vibes. It's hard to explain why these things are so effective, especially now, even compared to jump scares in newer games, but they really, really are. It might not look like a lot in video where, you know, it's devoid of all context, but trust me on this one, play this game now and they're still scary as hell. A really big part of that effectiveness is just how unexpected they are. Legend of Zelda is not a horror game at all, so you go in with a false sense of security that gets completely shattered the first time you encounter one of these things, and then it's like, all right.
Like, comment, and subscribe.